Order. Begin with our roll call, please.
Chuck Angier,
Here.
Tim Duffer,
Here.
Brian Fox,
Here.
Kermit King,
Here.
Bobby Lovelace, Ben Meeks, Ronald Scares, Keith Scruggs,
Here.
Bert Sellers.
Very good, thank you. So we have an updated agenda packet that was given to each one of the commission members this evening, where we've added a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this time, we'll have a moment of silence. Thank you. All right, if you would, we'll get you to stand. We'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Any agenda items to be added tonight?
No, sir, we do need to just do a formal vote since we amended the agenda for the moment of silence in the pledge, just
Okay.
as a formality.
All right, so we need a motion to amend the agenda for the moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All right. If you would cast your vote, please. All right, now we'll look at the agenda. I need a motion for an approval of the agenda if it meets your approval.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Angier.
I second it.
Have a second by Tim Duffer. Thank you. If you would cast your votes. Very good. Thank you. Agenda is approved. All right. If you haven't already, if you'll take a few moments and look over the minutes from the previous meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple issues with the minutes.
Yes, sir.
Page 5, minor thing, down towards the bottom of the Fire and Rescue Association report, says the Fire and Rescue Commission would like to thank the Board of Supervisors. Wouldn't that be the Fire and Rescue Association?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then on page 9, I don't say much, but I want to make sure that it's right. And I did not question how many miles were on the truck at Climax for repair. The comment I was making was that in my tenure here, I've become discouraged at the quality of equipment that manufacturers are putting out there. It seems like they save all their good stuff for the general market and save all their garbage for the fire and rescue, because that truck only had 39,000 miles on it and requiring that kind of repairs. So it's just a comment about the industry that I've made as an observation.
Where was that, Mr. Angier?
Pardon me?
What page was that on?
Page 9, down at the bottom, my comments.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we accept the minutes with the additions by Mr. Angiers.
Have a motion by Mr. Duffer.
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Angier.
Or Kermit.
All right, if you would cast your votes, please. Thank you. Very good. The minutes are approved with the additions and corrections. Presentations. Do we have any presentations tonight,
No, sir, we do not.
No presentation. All right. Hearing of the citizens. Each person addressing this commission under the hearing of citizens shall be a resident or landowner of the county or registered agent of such resident or landowner. Each person shall step up, give his or her name, district, and an audible tone of voice for the record. Unless further time is granted by the chairman, shall limit his or her address to 3 minutes. No person shall be permitted to address the commission more than once during the hearing of the citizens. All remarks shall be addressed to the commission as a body and not to the individual member thereof. Hearing of the citizens shall last for a maximum of 45 minutes. Any individual that is signed up to speak during said section who does not get the opportunity to do so because of the aforementioned time limit shall be given speaking priority at the next commission meeting. Absent chairman's approval, no person shall be able to speak who has not signed up. Hearing of the citizens, sir.
We had someone sign up, but they've going to ask to withdraw to hold their comments for a later date.
Okay, so they would, okay. So we have none. All right. Fire and Rescue Association report. Chief Fowler, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the only thing I'd like to say is, I'd like to bring your attention, we've got a lot of members in fire and rescue in the county that are suffering from COVID, them or their families, and it's putting a strain on them. Just keep them in your thoughts and prayers and lift them up when you get an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. County staff report. Director?
Thank you, sir, and I'll second what Chief Fowler said there. We do have several of both our career and volunteer folks that are dealing with that, and it's a terrible thing. Just a couple of points to make. The question was raised at the last commission meeting and in the association about, we worked on the accountability, fireground accountability policy, and the command boards for the vehicles. We've selected those, and I'm in the process of pricing them. I've let the folks from the association look at it, and they've all approved. They come in various sizes. I'm trying to get some of the larger ones that go like in the back of like what Chief Fowler has in his vehicle, and a couple of those we have out there, but those are pretty pricey. But I'm looking at some different options on those right now before we can get those ordered. And second thing is just a little update on the Blue Ridge Rock Festival we had. We treated over the span of the period, which wound up being a little longer period than we originally anticipated, but we treated hundreds of patients, mostly for minor things, transported less than 30 off-site to various hospitals, but I could not be more proud of our folks that worked over there, volunteer career alike. They really performed with excellence. I could not be more proud of the job they did. They got better as it went on. Had a few bugs to work out in the first day, but it improved every day. Those folks at times were treating 20, 30 patients at one time, and the 10 over there would be bombarded on occasion, but they did a great job, and really, really proud of that. The agencies around the venue also stepped up, and we didn't have a huge call volume around the venue itself. We had a few calls, but not what I anticipated. I thought it'd be larger than it was as far as outside the venue, but everybody did a great job. All the agencies pitched in, even with equipment. Well, we actually had to reach out to the city, and they loaned us a gator, so we'd have an extra one. I really appreciate that. But all in all, I think all our folks over there performed with excellence. I was very, very proud of them. Really proud of them. Other than that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Any unfinished business tonight? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to new business. Board of Supervisors Communications.
I'll cover that for Mr. Scarce, who cannot be here tonight. The Board of Supervisors at their September meeting took 2 actions dealing with fire and rescue. The first is they took up the resolution we had sent back to give Climax $4,000 of the capital reserve funds to work or fix a 1999 Freightliner. They did approve the $4,000 unanimously, and then they also voted to take the Arpa money that the county has gotten and give a $500 stipend incentive to any volunteer fire and rescue member who has answered at least 8 calls between January 1 and August 31 of this year, and will be fully vaccinated before or by the 31st of October. And we've created a report. I've sent the paperwork out to the agencies on how to track that and what we need back to give them the $500 stipend.
Very good. And I will let everybody know that as far as the vaccination goes, DATC, the Dam Area Training Center, is holding a vaccination clinic this Thursday, the 30th of September at 9 a.m. You don't need an appointment. You can just show up, bring your family if they need to be vaccinated, whatever the case may be. Pfizer is the only vaccine they have available at this moment, which is one of the 2-shot doses. So taking that on the 30th and then getting that second dose 21 to 28 days later will put you right in line with that October 30th deadline. So very good. Thank you. That begins at 9 a.m., by the way, if I didn't say that, on the 30th. All right, ARPA Funding Committee.
I'm going to start this, and then the other members of the committee are probably going to jump in. We met, and we have gone over the guidelines. The guidelines are fairly restrictive as far as what the money can and cannot be used for. And if you recall, the Board of Supervisors approved $1 million for the fire and rescue volunteer agencies to use. We have roughly about a 2-year period to use the money. So we've met, and after reviewing those guidelines, we've come up with a process to where each of the agencies can apply for up to $43,000, and they can apply for more than one project. So you might have a project that's $5,000, another's $10,000, another's $7,000. They can apply for multiple projects just up to a max of $43,000. I'm developing a application packet based on direction of the committee, if everything is well with you tonight, and we'll send that out and we'll start taking the applications November 1, and we're giving them till March 31 actually that's supposed to be 2022, not 2021, my apologies, to apply for those funds. And what we would do is each time we get them, we'll go through them, grade them, look at them, recommend them, not recommend them, but if we recommend them, we bring them in here for the commission to look at and give approval to as well. And then once a project is approved, we will give them a year to use the funds and complete the project. Again, a lot of the funds are restricted. We went through and tried to come up with a list of some ideas. Chief Fowler had called around some other places too to see, just get some ideas of what they had thought about using it. And some of those things are obviously SCBA replacement, which a lot of agencies need. Improvements to the stations. The ARPA funding talks a lot about infrastructure and improvement to infrastructure. So this is an opportunity for a lot of stations to do some renovations if they need, maybe improve their HVAC and ventilation systems, going to touchless fixtures and light switches as an example. Just general station improvements and air cleansing systems for not only station, but for ambulances. They're making air cleansing systems for ambulances now. So those are just some suggested uses for the stations to start thinking about using the money for and applying for. Like I say, it is fairly restrictive. We do have to follow federal guidelines as far as the process of purchasing and so forth. And we've talked with Ms. Connie Gibson, our purchasing agent, on that as well to get some direction, make sure we stay within the guidelines. But I'll stop there and let the others jump in, and I'm sure they may have a few things to add. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So the Board of Supervisors already allocated this. Do these expenditures have to go back to the board to be approved?
That was a question I'm going to need to ask the Finance Committee just to see if they might have to. I don't know, since they've already allocated it. I honestly can't give you a 100% answer, but I'm going to check into that.
Chris, do you want to address the part that if somebody didn't actually apply for the money, that it would actually be approved to go back into the pot to be redistributed again?
Yeah, one of the things we talked about was after we get all the applications, we've gone through everything in March, or at the end of March, we look and see, is there any residual monies? And we may have some agencies that don't use the full 47,000. So they would have another opportunity to come back to, apply again if there's projects out there that enough, an agency needed and there was funding left over, we could let that happen. Or we also talked about a couple things that might be for the good of everybody, that we might be able to use the money for, to keep, as an example, spare air packs. We have none. Maybe having some spare air packs on the shelf for when, if Callens calls me and they've lost an air pack tonight, something malfunctioned, I'd be able to pull a spare off the shelf, give it to them, those type of things. So there's a couple things we talked about, but, allowing the agencies, if there's projects out there, if Agency A didn't need the full funding and Agency B did, for some other projects that were worthwhile, they might be able to reapply for more.
Is there an educational piece to this for the chiefs of the agencies, so y'all don't end up with 1,000 applications that would never be accepted, that y'all have to sift through and read to know exactly kind of hone it down a little bit so they know they're not just applying for $43,000 free dollars, that there is really tight guidelines so they don't just submit them and overload you all with applications?
Yeah, I think a lot of that's going to depend on us, honestly, and talking with like the association and so forth, and just giving them some of the examples we've set forth. And of course, I mean, they're welcome to call me, or I'm sure any guys on the committee here. I think if it's anything questionable, we would talk about that among ourselves, saying, hey, Agency B's thinking about this. It's questionable. What do you think? And we'll also be talking with Kim Vanderhyde, our finance person, because she'll have a lot of input on some of those applications as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I think we talked about in the ad hoc committee that each chief or department would be given a packet.
Okay.
So that way they would have a packet of
Very
information together. That way if I use Callens, for instance, Callens would get a packet with their name on it and say, here, this is your packet with some instructions in it and an application.
Very good.
So that way you wouldn't have, everybody calling everybody trying to figure out what they can apply for. Most of it will be inside of the packet.
Very good, very good.
We've also extended an invitation. I think a committee is going to try to attend the Fire and Rescue Association meeting prior to the process starting and have a question and answer process.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, Director Slint, looking at this, and it's the section 35.5 of this Corona State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, and trying to make heads or tails out of what you can and can't buy. It looks like people can go back as far as March 3rd of 2021. If they've already had expenditures, they can submit that as well. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding, if it comes within those guidelines.
So, and I guess when we talk about protective equipment, SCBA's, do you see where SCBA's falls into this category?
If it's to deal with like, and I've run some of that by Ms. Vanderhyde, a couple things like that. It doesn't specifically say that, but it talks about PPE, and I think it definitely could qualify for PPE. And I'll give you a case in point. I know a couple of fire departments that used the money for that because they run a high level of cost in nursing homes, as an example. And some of the nursing homes they were going to had high patient COVID count. And they were literally having to put SCBA's on every time they went into a nursing home to treat a patient. So, their justification was going down there into that realm, which made sense. So I think there's a lot of justification for SCBA's. I'm not sure any other fire gear past that is going to qualify, to tell you the truth. But I think that's about one of the few we could get.
Yeah. And I would concur with what Chairman was asking or stating just now, is somehow or other, I think us or some group needs to sit down and go through this thing and give the officers of the Rescue Squad Fire Departments a good list of what's going to fit, because if we don't, we're going to have mass confusion, in my opinion, because I've read this thing at least 4 times, and to your point, I don't see a whole lot of stuff they use that's going to fit with the way this is read. And that may be an interpretation that somebody makes that'll open that up, but I think it'd be a lot of confusion reading this if we don't give a specific list.
I think you're right. Again, I go back to, I think a lot of, where it talks about infrastructure, I think this is going to be the opportunity for a lot of departments to improve stations and so forth. I believe we're going to see a lot of that, I hope, because we do have departments that could use that, improve their HVAC, put up cleaning, the HVAC systems now you can buy that have the ultraviolet light cleansing systems in them. There's a lot of things they can do to improve their station and the quality of the stations. And, the other thing when you go through that document, it talks a lot about health equity and getting out into areas of need. And I take that to mean areas where maybe healthcare, where those that are poverty-stricken cannot get to healthcare and so forth. And, I think Pittsylvania County, we can prove and have maps that actually show the areas that are considered or deemed to need health or not equitable in the county. So I think there's some things we can use justifications for, the areas that some of these stations serve for some of that too. So I believe there's ways around some of that, but I do agree with you. It is very restrictive. It's not like the CARES money where we were able to, buy ambulances as an example. So I think we're going to really have to watch that. And again, we're going to be leaning on Ms. Vanderhyde quite a bit in finance.
I know when I first heard about this, what went through my mind was turnout gear, fire hose, SCBA's. But when I read this, I don't see that it can be spent for that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of restrictions to it. And let me back up too. You made a point there about going back in time for some of those items maybe somebody's already purchased. If somebody wanted to try to use for that, I think we're still going to require them to do an application. There's still going to have to be an approval process, just because it's already been spent. And it may be well within the guidelines, but they're still going to have to go through some kind of process, a vetting process with all this.
Absolutely. I just know some agencies have probably already bought sprayers and stuff like that to sanitize equipment that they can get reimbursed for, so.
Mr. Director, you think it would be a good idea to send all the commissioner members and possibly, if Chief Fowler from Fire Rescue doesn't have a copy of that 56-page document, actually get that so they can look through it?
The committee members
You got
have
a
it.
copy, okay.
Yeah. And honestly, when I send out a packet I'm going to send those with it.
Okay.
In fact, I may send my copy because I've highlighted quite a bit and made a lot of notes that might make it easier for them, so.
I think it used, if I'm correct, it used words like a lot for infrastructure. And, infrastructure is a broad category in my mind. And, and like I said, and I don't know whether it meant infrastructure for the individual departments or infrastructure for the Pittsylvania County. I'm taking it as Pittsylvania County since it come through the Board of Supervisors. And the infrastructure to make the public safety work, I guess I don't know what I'm answering Commissioner Scruggs' question or not, but about the SCBA's and, it takes all of that to make the public safety infrastructure work. And I guess I may be grabbing at a straw, but that's, when I look at infrastructure, it's kind of broad.
Right, and that's going to be, one of the things that I read into this thing as I was reading it, it said related to COVID-19. So that's why I just want to make sure that we set some good guidelines for people. Somebody may come back and say, how does the SCBA relate to COVID-19? Because I'm sure a lot of people like to get their hands on SCBA's. And I'm glad we can spend this. I just don't want to see us put the chiefs in a bad situation where they're guessing about what they can spend it on.
I tried, when I did the research, I tried to find a body that decides yes or no, and I was unable to find that. But I can tell you some of the localities that I contacted are actually even using it for fire trucks.
I didn't read it that way, but
I didn't read that part either, but I did read, I read about the, infrastructure, and I tied the SCBA's, and I guess like I said, the lighting and the HVAC systems, all that, to me, that's infrastructure.
and you're right, Mr. Fowler, and maybe what we have to do is make some tough decisions.
When I asked, some of them referred back to the CARES money, and I know Mr. Slimp worked with that as well, but they were talking about in there, it talked about infrastructure. And they were talking about, and the individuals that I was talking to from a state level were talking about the different agencies that bought police cars, ambulances, and all that stuff, and deemed it to be part of infrastructure. So I don't have the answer, but I did a lot of phone calling and research, and that's kind of where it went. I think we're closer to being on track than some other localities.
Any other questions or comments for the ad hoc committee? I'd like to thank you all for doing that. That's good work.
We do need a motion and
Yes.
a vote, please. I need to take it back to the board,
There's
let them
no
know
other-
our process.
All right, there's no other questions for the ad hoc committee. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to recommend, to approve the proposed process for applying for the ARPA funds as presented and send the same to the Board of Supervisors for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Or if you would, cast your votes, please. That's approved. Thank you, gentlemen. Item 3 under new business, hospital diversion. Director.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I think what I was just added to the agenda because we talked about it in the matters of, like you said, matters of the commission last month. We didn't really get into a deep discussion on it. But all of us just sitting up here just wiring phones and pagers, that's all we get is diversion text now. This one's on, this one's off, this one's soft, this one's not, this one's full. And sometimes it's timely and sometimes it's just all day long. But I don't know if it's anything we can do or it's something we can help these volunteers out with going. And I'm going to use Mike Neal since he's not here tonight. But anyway, if Mike leaves Ringgold and has to go to Gretna, that's a long turnaround for him to come back. And just like us out at Cowlins, I'll use us, but anyway, we 2 hours away from anywhere. And if we add Lynchburg or Roanoke even to it, you done got 4 or 5 hour turnaround trip. And if that volunteer or that person, that man or woman comes up to answer that call, you're not going to get them but one time. They're not going to say, well, I'm not going to do that tonight because, I'm not going to ride all over the state of Virginia just to try to find a hospital that's open. And also, to me, if it's on diversion for one agency in the county, it's on diversion for all agencies. I don't know how some transport and some don't transport. So I just kind of thought we ought to discuss it a little bit. If we got any recommendations, maybe we can come up with something that would work for us.
Mr. Chairman, my issue too is, and this is more for it works for all of the county, but for the southern area from my districts, is you get Danville goes on diversion, South Boston goes on diversion, Gretna goes on diversion, Martinsville goes on diversion, UNC and Eden goes on diversion. Where do they go? When they go inside Danville, they have problems with the staff because they came anyway. So, the local hospitals need to understand too that they're not the only ones on diversion. And like Mr. King said, you get a volunteer. I mean, we do have career people and that's their job, but we also, volunteers make up the system. They're not going to run to Roanoke but one time, if you get them to go. There's people that probably don't know how to get to Roanoke's hospital. And then if they send them to, especially on the southern end, they're going to send them to Durham Regional. to me, that's not feasible, that we've got to have a solution. I don't know what that solution is, because I know the staff, you know, I've talked with the hospitals, they have staffing issues, you know, and they kind of put it back on us, and they want to ask, well, can we go to other facilities? Can we go to the Med Expresses? Can we go to, and I don't want to use names, but, you know, can we go to these local doctor's offices? And the answer is really no. I mean, we can, but we also have to follow the Medicare rules, the Medicare guidelines, just like they do. And I'm going to say this as a commissioner, the hospitals need to talk to the legislators, because they've got to help change that. So yes, we can go, or we could go to a acute care, secondary ER, whatever it may be, that may not be classified as a hospital, but only if they change the CMS guidelines for the billing. So, and that may even be on the Office of EMS rules and regulation change. I would have, you know, I'm not sure we can physically go to another place without approval. So it's not just, it's easy to say, well, take them to Med Express. That's easy to say, but not easy to do. So we definitely need to get the hospitals. I know Mr. Slimp went to Roanoke with the Near Southwest Preparedness Alliance, and it was trying to, you know, basically encourage people not to go to the hospital for minor items, not to go to the hospital to get your COVID test. You know, I don't see it getting any better anytime soon with the staffing of the hospital. So we definitely need to have, or at least get Mr. Slimp, somebody in the county to take us a little bit further, because it's affecting the volunteers greatly.
Well, and sometimes you see, excuse me,
Go ahead.
sometimes to me, sometimes it's timely. I mean, it's like 5 o'clock when day staff leaves, most time the phone's going to click in diversion. You know, but today, it's been out of the norm, and every time my phone buzzes, it's a different diversion. So, but, you know, most of the time it's 5 o'clock. It's when I guess the day staff leaves, I guess. And I guess that makes up a big part of the ERs, and will look like as soon as 5 o'clock hits, the hospital's on diversion. And most of us, if we got any of the paid staff that we got in our buildings, most of the time they leave at 5 o'clock. That's when we take over. So, you know, it may be, I don't know, like I said, maybe something, like I said, Mr. Duffer here, he's got some good recommendations, and maybe somebody else has some. Maybe we can help each other, and help the hospital help us.
Mr. Chairman, I think we also need to look at the fact that the public's contributing a lot to this. We need to do some form of education for the public, media blitz or whatever. I mean, we're getting called for toothaches, headaches. The public needs to understand the strain on the system right now. They need to know what the hospital's trying to deal with. And they need to understand, go to their doctor, go to the Med Express, go to those facilities, utilize those for what they're meant to be. Don't call for an ambulance to transport. And the other side of the coin, a lot of them call because they don't have a vehicle and a means to get there. And we may need to look at something to provide something for that.
Mr. Director, have y'all had an occasion to talk to the O's of any of the hospitals?
I'm sorry,
The CEOs, COOs, CNOs, any of the O's of any of the facilities that are doing the diversion, to try to get some explanations to maybe why and see what their plan is?
in the last week, I've had conversations with one of the CEOs. And in that conversation, and it was spawned because of another issue, but I brought up on a side note, we needed to revisit the diversion policy because they would divert some agencies, but not other agencies. And they have agreed to sit down and talk about that with us. But a couple things to add to that conversation overall is, one, we actually wrote a protocol to use during the Blue Ridge Music Festival, kind of as opportunity to test it too, to use some of the fast track type, the Med Expresses and so forth, only to find out they can't accept ambulance patients, which is an issue. Because we thought
they can't accept what?
they cannot accept ambulance patients. So if I load you up and you just need maybe 5 stitches in your arm, I could have took you to like Centra, Danville, they're fast track down there, but they can't accept that patient off an ambulance, so they told us. But I've fielded several calls from some chiefs throughout the whole county lately, talking about this very issue, and we have two cases of diversion here, really. We have one on the north end where they just don't have capacity. They're very limited bed space. One on the south end, staffing's an issue. And, 2 things have been asked of, especially how can we start the conversation with Gretna ER to expand, because they stay fairly busy there. How could we get that facility talking with Centra to expand, and what are the options to get Centra to open up a similar facility in the south end of an emergent, standalone ER or something like that. So we have some other choices in the county. I think that conversation really has to happen at a higher level than me, potentially probably the Board of Supervisors, but that has been, several chiefs have talked to me about that over about the last month.
Have we talked to the OMD for these squads in the county about the diversion protocol that's out for COVID, with the 3 different tiers where you can actually go on a diversion protocol where you can actually, for lack of better terms, if the patient deemed is not medically urgent, you can call medical control and get the approval to leave them there at home?
We have talked, we are talking, and we have talked. We found some protocols, and one of them they felt was had a potential for a lot of liability, but we have reached out and found some other protocols and working. Casey, I know Casey's working with them to see what else we can come up with there, because it go back to what Chief Fowler said. Not every patient needs an ambulance by any means.
I'm pretty sure it was the city of Martinsville. They actually implemented that COVID diversion protocol where they would actually, if you were not in a life-threatening medical emergency or traumatic injury, you stayed home.
And that's the one actually we initially took, and they just felt that from a liability potential, that was a little too great. We needed to probably massage that or come up with another one, but they are very willing to work with us on that.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I just caution on that. I think that'll work. I think that things like that work, but we just got to make sure that we've got everything, all our I's, dotted, T's crossed, because, even if we do something like that, I think the county needs to run that by our underwriters on the insurance. Because they're ultimately going to be the ones that's going to be on the hook for that. So, and the provider. So, that's just, I worry about some of the protocols that where we refuse, or I don't want to say refuse, because if we got a protocol, we're not really refusing, but we're not taking them to the hospital if they really want to go. Now, I agree with Chief Fowler that, toothaches don't need to go to the ER, but, that's touchy with certain folks. Your seasoned providers versus new providers, where's that decision? I think that protocol needs to be vetted really, really well.
And I think ultimately it would fall back to the OMD, because you have to call, or medical control, whoever the doctor you speak to in that emergency department that you call is actually going to be the one that's the final verdict. But, we live in an environment right now where, to Chief Fowler's point, some people don't have primary care physicians. The emergency room is their primary care. If they want their blood pressure medicine changed, they go to the emergency room. If they've got the sniffles and want a COVID test, they go to the emergency room, as Commissioner Duffer said. And I don't know where you begin that change, because for years we preached call 911. If you have a problem, call 911. Well, now they have a host of problems and they're calling 911. And so the system's now overloaded, and I go to the point of education. It's going to take a lot of education, and I don't think we have the amount of time we need to get that out to do us a lot of good on the front end. But I don't know where the end of that road is at, but you know, the hospitals are understaffed nationwide. The nurses and staffing that they do have, they're working countless hours. You know, EMS providers, same thing. They're working countless hours, shift after shift after shift, because the staffing level at every division is very low. What's your pleasure? We can, if y'all would like to recommend to the Board of Supervisors to take some action to further investigate.
I think that would be a start. They might could get, you know, they might could touch some avenues that we can't get into, or Mr. Slint be the one couldn't get into. They might could talk, like you said, talk to some CEOs or, you know, chairmans of boards and see what's really going on. And like I said, I think it's, you know, like someone said, I think it's a staffing, a lot of the staffing issue, because if you look around the country as a whole, everywhere you stop is a hiring sign.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I know the hospitals are probably no different. But, you know, unfortunately, that's one of the things that we can't afford to do without. And we need, you know, and like I said, and plus, for as offering our citizens and our constituents in our area, we should offer them the best of care and to the closest facility. And if that facility is the closest one's on diversion, and we can't go there, we're not offering them the best care that we can give them.
Well, I know, I won't speak for Sova Damel, but I'm pretty sure that some of their administrative staff would be willing to take up the conversation and have that meeting. So if you all would like the idea, I'll entertain a motion.
I have a question,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Since I'm kind of on the outside looking in. The one thing that keeps on floating up is the non-emergency calls. I mean, why can't we weed them out? I know there's a reason, I just don't know what it is.
I think a lot of it is, once the screeners in dispatch screen that call based on their emergency medical dispatch protocol, it warrants a dispatch for an ambulance or first responders. They get out there. It's all about where the liability is. So if I tell you you have a finger that you smashed in the door, and I tell you you don't need to go to the hospital, and then I leave and you have a heart attack and something goes wrong, there's a measure of liability there because we didn't take you because you wanted to go. And some of that's what we are talking about trying to overcome, as to where that liability actually lies and who's actually going to be the bearer of that.
And so, you know, it's weekly that somebody from staff is working with social services or adult protective services in some of these patients. I know we have one in Dean's area that we've talked to adult protective services and social services on multiple times, but, you know, sometimes their hands are tied that they can only do so much. So, you know, but we do, when we see that pattern starting, we do try to see what we can do to get them to stop calling, except for when they really need us. And I'm not saying that sometimes they do need you. I mean, you know, a lot of these folks live in are elderly, live with poverty, some type of physical impairment. So some of their calls are legitimate. We're not saying they're not. But back to Chief Fowler's thing, when they're calling because their tooth is hurting, or, you know, we get several nowadays that they're just down on the floor and they can't get up. And, you know, they're in between being able to probably go into a nursing home financially and getting some type of help at home. And we see a lot of that. And it's just not us. That's everywhere you go that you're seeing that these days.
And one thing I'm a firm believer and advocate in is being very honest with your patients. When you get on the scene of that call, you know, we've had instances where you get on the scene, you know the hospital is overloaded with patients. Be honest with the patient and say, look, we don't mind taking you if you want to go, but there's a really good chance, based on the crowdedness of the hospital these days, you're stable. You may end up in the waiting room, and you're not trying to talk them out of it. You're just being honest and giving them upfront data that can help them make an informed, educated decision. Because if you take them and you don't tell them that, and they put them in the waiting room for 4 hours, your name's mud. The next time they see you, they're going to say, why didn't you tell me I was going to the waiting room for 4 hours? So, you know, we want to be transparent, full disclosure with the patients, not trying to talk them into or out of anything, but be really honest with them about the delayed time, about, hey, we're going to take you to Lynchburg because Gretna's on diversion, or we're going to take you to Martinsville because Danville's on diversion. And they may say, we've had this happen before. I don't want to go there. I'd rather not. I'll go home and just see how it plays out. Because if we're honest on what we're doing with them, sometimes they make their own decisions. We don't have to talk them into or out of anything. We just exercise full disclosure and transparency with the patient, tell them everything we know, that's really be honest with them, and then they change their decision. So, that may be an avenue to pursue with all our providers if we go back to our respective agencies, is full transparency with the patient. These hospitals on diversion. I listen to the radio and I hear ambulances. Hey, what hospital can we go to? Somebody tell me what hospital we can go to and how do you get there? Because I've never been there. To everybody's point that said that when I listen to the radio, I've heard that multiple times. And if it's somewhere you don't normally go, you're not going to know. And that's going to elongate the transport too, because when you get into that general area, you're trying to find the hospital.
Mr. Chairman, one thing too, and this more for Mr. Slim. I know you're on the, you represent the county as far as the Western Virginia EMS Council, which is a group that also supports the Department of Health Office of EMS. One recommendation is we need to have options. I still think we need options as far as legislative rules and regulations, CMS. I'll use an example. I mean, everybody's got an iPhone, everybody's got iPads, something to take some of that liability off in certain areas. It may not work in all, but telemedicine. All right, the other problem with telemedicine is some of the doctors don't want to do it because they're not physically touching the patient, so they don't want to accept the liability. So it all goes back to some point, shape, form, or fashion. It's got to get into the legislative body in Richmond somewhere, because they've got to make a change to either protect us, give us options to where we can go to other than ERs or other than hospitals, and they got to be able to protect the doctors if they're going to. A doctor's not going to do telemedicine if he's not protected, and the patient may listen to the doctor, even if it's on a video screen.
Well, one other thing that we face is while the outlying clinics are good in their own right, if you come in with chest pains, you're going to the hospital. You come in with difficulty breathing, you're going to the hospital. So they'll treat what they can in their own right, and so to them, they do a good job at that. But the minute you mention, I'm having chest pain, you're going to the hospital. Mm-hmm. They don't want to keep you there, but it all plays back, Mr. Andrew, to that point of the liability. Who's going to accept liability? Because if that doc in a box or outlying clinic takes that patient and says, oh, you're fine, go home, and that patient dies of a heart attack because they didn't send them to the hospital, they're going to come back and try to sue that clinic and that doctor or that nurse or whoever it was. The liability, I think, is the biggest piece of all this, is who's going to accept that liability to say we're not taking it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
But to put what Mr. Andrews said together with what Mr. Duffer said and what you said, that when that 911 call is made to the dispatcher moves it on because, that's his or her job, and they do a super job at it.
And liability.
But at the end of the road, there stands a lone volunteer. Has got to make this decision on what to do with this patient versus when the hospital is on a diversion, they don't know where to go with it. And I don't think that's fair to the volunteer or to any provider to have to worry about that situation. You got a patient here they ultimately guy has to do something with, and then they don't know where to take it.
I don't know the answer to this, but,
I don't either.
and it sounds like a stupid question, but can hospitals legally divert patients?
Technically, no. I mean, if you show up, they pretty much have to take you.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it's a courtesy. And I'll go back to the situation in Gretna. When Gretna goes on diversion, they're out of beds. I mean, there's nowhere else to put that patient. Some hospitals are going on diversion because they just don't have staff to care for patients. So, some hospitals are also going on diversion because they're out of equipment, like they have no more ventilators, as an example. So, I mean, those type things.
The root cause of it, is it really COVID overrun with patients, or is it lack of staffing by the?
I think it's a mixture, right? I mean, COVID patients are obviously not helping, because they're long-term. They're in that ICU for 2 weeks. They're taking up those ventilators and so forth. But I think that adds to the problem, but to say that's the only reason, no, that's not the only reason.
If you go back and look at the calls that we're running, an overwhelming majority is people abusing the system. They really don't need to go to a ER. They need to go to their primary care physician or like he said, immediate care, those type facilities. They don't need to go to the ER to start with. And the public is doing it to themselves.
Yeah.
And what they don't understand, when they do that and they send an ambulance to Lynchburg from the south end of the county, and that agency only has 2, the next call depletes EMS for everybody in that area.
I agree because, I mean, I can tell you back in the 80s when I was running calls, that happened. So that hasn't changed and it's
Well,
probably increased.
multiplied by 10, because
Yeah.
I was running them in the 80s too,
Because
and people have gone.
we were talking about that
overboard.
earlier tonight. When I originally got into this, we were dispatching our own calls, so they got somewhat screened. But lawsuits were not as prevalent then as they are now either. But we still ran a lot of those calls.
Well, you know, and you asked if the hospitals, yes, if you cross the threshold of their property, theoretically, they've got to accept you. I mean, if you go in, they've got to accept you. Diversion is, you know, something, so I use like Richmond area. I mean, they got 5 hospitals. All right, so diversion, if one is busy, it's probably better for the patient to go to a non-busy hospital. Well, that works in Richmond, but it doesn't work in Pittsylvania County. You know, especially, you know, if Gretna goes on diversion because they're out of beds, then you go to Lynchburg, that's good. But here lately, it's every hospital in the region is going on diversion. And so at that point, you can't do it. I mean, you can't expect a volunteer that's never been to Roanoke before to the hospital in their life. To me, that's starting to question, is that good patient care?
Well, that's
To
a
go
long
to-
way to go with an
yeah.
unstable patient.
So, or, I mean, if they had to go to Durham, Durham goes, you know, they'll send you to Durham Regional. You have to go to Wake Forest, UNC, Chapel Hill. I mean, are you starting to provide good care at that point? You know, even if the hospital's busy, they can stabilize, and then we can go to a higher level of care.
So I got a couple questions, I guess, Chris, they'd come to you. The Near Southwest Prepared Alliance, I think that would be our avenue to try to mobilize like a makeshift hospital, like a 10 hospital, something to that effect. And I use Sova Danville for an illustration because I have the most experience dealing with them. If they're overrun, and they are, I mean, they've only got a couple of vents left in the hospital, and I mean, they got their back against the wall with the staffing issues and such. At what point can we request a mobile hospital to be set up? And even if it's National Guard, anybody to come here just to give us a hand to try to work through this.
I asked that question about a month ago on one night saying, hey, I'm down to 2 hospitals within an hour of Pittsylvania County accepting patients. If I want a mobile hospital, how do I get it? And I never got a definite, firm answer. But again, part of their problem is they're going to pull nurses from other areas and doctors from other areas. So staffing was one of those issues. But I also got the answer, well, technically you don't have to divert from a hospital. And of course, I responded there, well, a couple of our hospitals have limited beds. I mean, I can take 15 more patients here, sure, but there's nowhere to physically put them. So, but I have asked that question and never gotten a distinct answer back, because I was at that point about a month ago of putting in a request to the EOC to have a mobile hospital brought in and set up, because we were literally overrun.
So
You said you had
gentlemen,
ano-
would
Did
it-
you have another question? You said you had,
No.
okay.
So, I mean, I would say you was going to ask, my recommendation would be that, you know, Mr. Slimp or go to the Board of Supervisors, or he talk to Department of EMS for some answers. You know, maybe the Board of Supervisors needs to talk to Centra maybe about expanding their ER, or even talk to Sova about, you know, changing Mount Hermon to external ER, or Centra coming south. I'm not, you know, I don't want to get into that. That's above our level, but maybe they can talk to them. I mean, that'd be my first recommendations. And then just to get maybe a definition or redo our diversion policy to make sure it's vetted very well. Because I don't want to volunteer, and I wouldn't want to be put in that position myself of worried about the liability. As a volunteer, if I mess up or something happens to this patient, am I going to lose everything I own?
So if we want to make a recommendation, do we need that in the form of a motion, or can we just make a recommendation? Yes. Yes, sir.
Before
Chief.
you do that, has there been any kind of study done in the last few years to determine prior to COVID what our call volume was doing and what we were putting on the hospitals before that occurred and future growth? I mean, if we're talking about adding a facility, I would assume we're looking at years to get that done. And are we going to keep up with the growth with what we've got present? Do we need to take a look at that, get somebody to look at it from a outside perspective and decide? I mean, I'm sure some of the supervisors know potential growth, but, we don't want to put the horse or the wagon in front of the horse, I guess is what I'm getting at. We need to know if we're going to be able to handle the influx if we're going to have growth. Or are we taking care of what we've already had?
I can look at the EMS call volume and give you, well, I can tell you for like, just comparing physical years, FY 2021 and now 22, I looked, I put a thing in the newsletter the other week that our call volume, just when you compare the first, at that time, which was July and August of those 3 years, our call volume is significantly going
Well,
up every year.
I went back and looked at Blair's. In 2004, we ran 412 EMS calls. Right now, we're like 1,300 and some right now for the year.
And I'm sure the
And
hospitals
I mean, I
would
know
have-
COVID's doing some of that, but it's not doing it all.
the hospitals should actually probably be the best place for data because, think of all the influx of patients they get that we don't take. Because I think it's a systems issue, not just, EMS is getting bombarded, obviously. We're running 25 to 30 more calls a week this year than we did last year at this time. So the hospitals would have some of that data for us as well. Now, how do we get that? I don't know. I'd have to do some research, but I'm sure we can get it.
So would it be a fair and safe request to the other commissioners to ask either the Director of Public Safety or a Board of Supervisors representative or representatives to talk to some of these leaders of these facilities, whether it's Gretna, Central Gretna, or Danville, Sova, and just try to figure out where we are and what could our next step be to kind of alleviate this? Because, I don't want to say we could beat this horse all night long, but we could beat this horse all night long. And we really could. And I don't know that we'd ever get a resolution sitting here, but I think it would behoove us to have conversations at that level, because that's where your leaders talk to your leaders and get more information that we may not get at our particular level as responders going directly into the emergency room, talking to a charge nurse or a hot seat tech or whatever. So,
Would it be the consensus of the commission for me to ask Mr. Scarce to carry that back to the board? He is our representative to the board, and for those conversations maybe start taking place at that level.
I think it would.
So,
I think it
to
would
that
be.
point,
Yeah.
I can draft something to him, yes, sir. Be glad to.
if our agencies, diversion or not, deliver to the nearest medical facility and then let them make the triage decision there, does that give us a short-term solution? Because if we go back to the board, it's going to be another month, another 30 days before we get anywhere. So if our agencies deliver to the nearest medical facility, diversion or not, and let that hospital make a decision on triage, what happens then?
Well, they have to, if you take a patient here, they're going to have to accept the patient.
But if they're diverting, we can still go there,
You could.
and then we can let them triage them, and that gets us out of our dilemma.
Now, I will comment to this point on that don't be alarmed if you go to the hospital and they tell you that patient's going out front to triage. It takes you 45 minutes to clear triage because they got 50 patients in the waiting room and you're number 51. Come in on a stretcher. Because it's not necessarily priority anymore to a stretcher patient coming in because they're so overloaded, you just stack in line behind whoever was in front of you, and there is no cutting line or jumping to the front anymore. So sometimes it's kind of you darn if you do, darn if you don't, because if you take that hour-long ride up the road, you might be standing in triage at the local hospital for an hour, and the same time frame's gone by, but less miles and gas and wear on you folks. But that's just kind of a seed I wanted to plant right there about that, because sometimes you go in, most time right now, if their vitals are stable, they're probably going to go out front and wait.
And we do tell providers, if you have a critical patient, especially BLS crew, if you have a critical patient, you go to the closest hospital. I mean, it's just diversion or not, you got to go there. And, and then we'll get that patient stabilized, then we'll figure out the transfer later and so forth. But, yeah, they can go. It's up to them, whoever's providing care for that patient. I'll go back to what Mr. Duffer said, that, there's seasoned providers out there that would feel comfortable bypassing the hospital to go to another one because they can deal with that patient. But then there's some that just, A, they don't have that experience, or B, they don't have that certification.
Absolutely.
So,
But then if we're not watching, if we don't watch, they're going to be tied up on a 3 or 4 hour call going to some of these other hospitals. So,
The one little underlying thing I will throw in as a tidbit too is the excess wear and tear on the vehicles for the hours of operation, driving miles up the road and hours up the road, because all that's going to degrade your equipment even faster because it's putting more miles an hour.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of things that play in, and there's not one shiny silver bullet, I guess, that can fix it all, but just factors that add in.
Is it not such a thing as getting to what Mr. Scruggs was talking about? If we take a patient and they're triaging that patient, send them to the waiting room. You made the comment you may be there 45 minutes. You may be there for hours. Would it be too much to ask that the hospital have a caregiver there that's working that waiting room, working that triage area, to where our providers don't have to stay there? If she's looking at, as you said, 51 people and one's going south, I would think she'd carry a lot more weight to get them into the actual ER than any of us standing there with an ambulance would to start with.
And sometimes what we find is that triage nurse, that provider, they're a runner too, because if they do have that one patient that comes out to triage and they notice that, they've got to run to the back, try to figure out where they're going to put them, notify the charge nurse, hey, we need a bed, we got a critical patient in the waiting room, just went south on us. And it's a huge cascading effect that plays into that. So I don't know the answer to that question. But I'm okay with, and I'm kind of the persuasion that we let Director Slimp and maybe Mr. Warren and Mr. Ingram and some of the folks talk to these hospitals and just kind of feel it out and see where we're at, and is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or are we just starting into the tunnel now for year 2? If that's the consensus of the group, I'd be glad to make that recommendation.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. Aren't there organizations in place regionally, like amongst the hospitals and caregivers, that this diversion thing could be addressed with them?
We actually sat on the conference call, the Zoom meeting, you remember the other week? And we had representatives from all the fire and EMS agencies, I guess almost in all of Southwest Virginia. And then later that afternoon, we had all the hospital representatives in the exact same area, and it was this conversation. And the conversation gets to an end, the amens are said, the lights are cut out, and there was no resolution. And so I don't know, the conversations are being had, we just never reached the end of the conversation, or maybe not the end that we're looking for on the provider side, because we're looking for that, bring them on in, we'd love to have them all. And sometimes we don't get there. So, I don't know if that answers the question, but conversations are being had, Zoom meetings regularly.
Very regularly.
Yeah. So if it's a consensus of the group.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Let me ask,
Yes, sir.
do you think any of the agencies need a short-term resolution or or they're gonna continue to do what they're doing, and we can make it another 30 days? Is there anybody out there that you guys know of that need guidance right away on what to do? I would agree, we need something long-term and then something,
Right.
if we need something short-term.
Well, basically, we all doing the same thing. You know, we just, when that diversion hits, we just see which one we can take them to. So I don't know what the short term would be. You know, I can't answer that. I don't know what the.
I would hope with this recommendation that within a week, those meetings could begin happening. I would hope with the recommendation we sent up to the Board of Supervisors, I would hope within about a week, those meetings should at least be getting lined up to be had. I mean, I think the
Yeah,
facilities would
I
be
think it
open to the
could be.
meetings if, as long as the schedules would line up, but I think the hospital facilities would be willing to have that meeting. If the Board of Supervisors wouldn't have that meeting, I think maybe within 7 days, we could have those conversations, and maybe at that point, we could develop the short-term resolution you're talking about, and then maybe even look at a projected long-term solution if there is one.
So from here, what I do is on, usually tomorrow or Thursday, I send a memo back to the county administrator.
Okay.
And he puts it in a packet on Friday, just so the board members know things that were discussed. So they'll know by Friday evening, this is coming.
Mr. Ingram taking good notes right there. He's got it. I see him. He's taking good notes.
So, but, yeah, so hopefully they'll be starting to have some of that discussion. Yes, I'll see if we can move that along.
Okay, very good.
Can we do anything to start and educate the public now?
I know most of the agencies have social media platforms for the agencies at large.
Can we do a media release through the public safety director, through all of the channels that we have in this area, to put an interview
yeah.
together and let the public know?
Actually, I've already talked to our PIO the other day about that very thing. How do we start a campaign? And he's starting to work on that for us already.
I mean, I think some of the local news channels, I think they'd be shocked if they realized, if the general public knew how much the hospital's on diversion. I mean, it's been 6 go out since 7 o'clock this morning, I just say in county.
So in that recommendation, I guess, Director, we'd also like to, and we'll participate. We don't have a problem. I'll speak for myself anyway. Chief Fowler, I'm pretty sure you're probably on board. Mr. King, you know, we'd love to get involved in a media blitz to say, hey, this is when you call 911, this is what you go to the hospital for, these are not what you go for. I've seen some people on their social media pages for their agencies put things of, call 911, there's a column. Don't call 911, there's another column. And we try to use every platform out there. But yeah, a media blitz of any kind, even through like the PIO or having Caleb do something with that, or, you know, public safety blast it out, all the fire rescue agencies blast it out. Just that one common thread message.
Something else that may make people think, and some of the fire chiefs and the rescue squad captains may crucify me when we leave here, but what if we start reporting back to the public safety director how many of the calls we run a week are actually non-emergency calls that should have never had an ambulance dispatched to, and start sending that out in the public so they know, hey, I'm abusing the system. I mean, I don't think they realize the magnitude of the calls that are coming in and what they do to the system when they call. I really don't. Because it's genuinely good people that's making wrong decisions. I mean,
And some of it being social and economic based, you know, if community paramedicine can expand out, that'll hopefully take a little bit of the brunt off of, you know.
We
on the
hope
front end.
that's going to be happening with some stuff. So yeah, that's, I think that is one of the answers. It's not an overnight answer, but it's definitely an answer to stopping some of that call volume. So yeah.
All right.
Let's see, Ms. Lynn, that's another example of when I go back to the legislative part, the community paramedic. You know, right now we've got CARES money, we've got this money to help pay for certain things like that, but in 5 years you're not. You got to have some type of legislation, and that may have to start today, 4 or 5 years from now, to be able to support that. So there, you know, whether it be through the insurance companies, and some insurance companies have figured it out. I know Anthem is one of them. They will actually, they're starting to pay for refusals because they figured that a refusal, you know, or not taking somebody to the hospital is cheaper than taking them to the ER. But that's one, and there's, you know, so many more. Medicare I always say Medicare is the godfather of the insurance, medical insurance. What they do, all the rest do. So that's stuff that's just got to be changed. And if we have to start that today, so be it. So,
Any other discussion on the diversion piece?
One of the long-term solutions, back to Mr. Duffer's point, there's got to be a way to reduce liability exposure. Until somebody finds an answer to that, it's going to be an ongoing problem. That's why we're here. It's because of liability in a litigious society. Because you keep on talking about the frivolous, call them frivolous, the non-emergency calls. Well, you know, that's a big drain on everybody, and we got to find a way to stop that. But we've got the liability problem. That's one of the reasons you can't. So in this legislation that we hope somebody gets into, they'll find a way to protect emergency services from unnecessary litigation. That's not in our wheelhouse.
Correct. Very good. All right. There's no further discussion on that. We'll move to matters from the commissioners. I'll start on my left. Chief, do you have anything else tonight from fire rescue? Very good, sir. Mr. Duffer.
The only other thing I had other than the diversion, if it didn't come up, is I want to thank the team that done the medical tent. I was part of that, but I came just to be a hand, and I wanted to thank the people that managed it and took care of it. At times, it was extremely busy. I coughed up dust for 3 days after the event. So other than the dust, I enjoyed it. I think initially that event got kind of a bad rap, but personally speaking, there was some very nice people there. Yes, we had some that partied a little too hard, but overall, most of them were extremely nice people. And I don't understand the mosh pit, but they do. So, and most of it was just bumps and bruises. So I want to thank Mr. Slimp, Casey. Y'all done an outstanding job with that. So, thank you.
Mr. King.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Mr. Duffer said. Like I said, thank you, public safety, and all the dispatchers, and everybody that made this possible, that event possible, like law enforcement, our VDOT workers, can't leave them out from the street, So I think everybody did a super job with what they had to work with and the amount of people that they had to work with. But I think everything, it won't some people said it won't the best, but hey, it was a step forward, and y'all did a great job with it. But also, I'd like to wish Mr. Troy Talley Godspeed, that he gets better in his time of sickness. And all we can do is everybody stay safe.
Mr. Angier.
Just to thank the volunteers. The heart of a volunteer can't be beat.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
No, sir.
I'd like to take a minute and also echo what Mr. King and Mr. Duffer said. I had the privilege of being part of that event as well. I'd like to thank the White Oak Church for the use of their facilities. I'd also like to thank the White Oak Church for the day I was there. They actually cooked 2 meals for us, free of charge, and their hospitality is to be commended. For Casey up there in the tent, I was listening. Y'all had your back against the wall more than you didn't, and y'all did a heck of a job. Y'all did a really good job. Director, y'all pulled it off. You did a good job. To the board, Board of Supervisors, thank you for believing that public safety and the volunteers could handle it, because they did, and we had volunteers from all over the place. And like I said, at times they were way overtaxed, but they did it. I understand the next concert's been postponed till the spring, so we got some time to recover. Other than that, the volunteers, any of them out right, there's several right now that are out with COVID between the city, the county, and fire services. Remember them, remember their families. Some of them are worse off than others, and they're struggling with it. Some of their families have it, and they're having to take care of them at this time too. So remember all of those. And with that being said, we'll adjourn the meeting and see y'all next month.